The rain had begun to fall harder that evening in Austin, Texas, painting the streets in shimmering reflections of neon lights and traffic signals. Jake Miller, only 18 years old, tightened the hood of his jacket as he walked home from his part-time shift at the local diner. His sneakers splashed in shallow puddles, but he didn't mind. Working late hours was nothing new to him. Ever since his father had passed away, Jake had taken on odd jobs wherever he could. His heart carried both the weight of responsibility and the quiet determination to keep moving forward. As he passed by a dimly lit stretch of road, Jake noticed a car pulled over onto the shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked faintly against the rain, and the hood was propped open. He could see a woman standing next to it, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to shield herself from the drizzle. Inside the car, a small figure moved restlessly in the back seat. Jake slowed his pace, curiosity tugging at him, until he realized it wasn't just curiosity, it was instinct. He couldn't ignore someone who clearly needed help. The woman looked to be in her early 30s. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone who hadn't had a proper night's sleep in a long time. But even in that dim light, Jake could see kindness and strength in her features. She was doing her best to reassure the little boy inside, whose small hands pressed against the window, his eyes wide and anxious. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Something about the scene this fragile pair, caught in the rain, tugged at Jake's chest. He stepped closer, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the rain. "Need some help, ma'am?" His tone was polite, but steady, the way his father once taught him to approach strangers with respect and sincerity. The woman turned, startled at first, but then relief softened her features. "Oh, thank God," she murmured. "The car it won't start. I've been hearing noises all week, but I couldn't afford to take it in." Her words carried not just frustration, but the quiet shame of someone who had been carrying burdens too long on her own. Jake gave a reassuring smile and took a step closer to the open hood. "Don't worry, I can take a look." Without waiting for hesitation, he dropped his backpack to the ground and rolled up the sleeves of his jacket. The faint smell of oil and rain filled his senses, and in that moment, he felt a flicker of connection to his late father. Jake had grown up in a garage, watching his dad repair engines, replace parts, and teach him the language of cars before he even learned his multiplication tables. It wasn't just skill, it was memory, legacy, and love. The little boy's face appeared in the fogged window again, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Mom," he whispered loud, enough for Jake to hear. "He looks like a superhero." Jake chuckled softly, shaking his head as he bent over the engine. "Not a superhero," he muttered under his breath. "Just a kid who knows a little about cars." Still, the words touched him in a way he didn't expect. He remembered being that young, looking at his dad with the same kind of awe, believing he could fix anything in the world. The engine told Jake a story almost immediately. The belts worn thin, a spark plug out of alignment, and just enough neglect to make the car stall in the worst of moments. He reached into his backpack, pulling out a small multi-tool he always carried. Bit by bit, he worked, his hands steady and precise despite the rain soaking his hair and sleeves. Every twist of the tool reminded him of evenings spent in the garage with his father, the scent of grease and old radio music filling the air. For Jake, fixing cars wasn't just a chore, it was healing. Laura Parker, as the woman introduced herself, stood close by, watching with both worry and admiration. She couldn't believe her luck, that a teenager out of nowhere would stop to help her when most drivers simply passed without a second glance. Her heart ached from years of doing everything alone. Working double shifts at a grocery store and cleaning offices at night had worn her thin. Tommy, her 6-year-old son, was her reason for pushing forward, but nights like this often made her wonder how much longer she could keep fighting. Seeing Jake work so carefully sparked something unexpected inside her hope. The minutes passed quickly. though to Laura it felt like an eternity of uncertainty. Jake straightened, brushing wet hair from his forehead, and tried the ignition himself after making a few adjustments. To her amazement, the engine roared back to life, steady and strong, no longer sputtering in protest. Relief flooded her chest so powerfully that she had to blink away tears. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling. Thank you." She felt the weight of weeks of worry lift in a single heartbeat. Jake smiled sheepishly, wiping his hands on an old rag he'd pulled from his pocket. "It wasn't too bad, just needed a little attention. You should be okay for now, but you might want to get a mechanic to check it properly when you can." He didn't say it. Judgmentally, there was no trace of blame, only genuine concern. For him, helping someone in need wasn't about recognition or reward. It was simply the right thing to do. His father had always told him, "Kindness is free, but it's worth more than anything you can buy." Tommy couldn't stay inside the car any longer. He burst out of the back seat, splashing through puddles with tiny sneakers, his eyes glowing as he looked up at Jake. "Mom, did you see? He fixed it like magic." His small hands tugged at Jake's jacket. "You're the best, mister." Jake crouched down to Tommy's level, his smile softening. "Glad I could help, buddy, but your mum's the real superhero. She's the one taking care of you every day." Tommy tilted his head, thoughtful, and then grinned wide, as if he had just discovered a secret treasure. Laura's throat tightened at those words. No stranger had ever spoken to her with such respect, especially not a young man barely out of high school. She saw something in Jake that went beyond skill with cars, something rare, something selfless. "I really mean it," she said, her voice low but steady. "You didn't just fix my car. You gave me a little peace of mind tonight. That means more than you know." Jake felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't expected. He wasn't used to people looking at him like that with gratitude and trust. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the night carried a quiet calm that hadn't been there before. Laura started the car again, and the steady hum filled the silence with reassurance. Tommy climbed back into the seat, still waving at Jake with excitement. Laura rolled down the window, leaning slightly toward him. "If you ever need a meal or just a place to rest, you're welcome at our home," she offered shyly. It wasn't charity. It was her way of saying that his kindness mattered. Jake nodded, touched by her sincerity, and watched as they drove away, headlights glowing in the misty night. As Jake picked up his backpack and continued walking home, he felt strangely lighter, despite the rain still clinging to his jacket. Something about that night lingered in his chest like a spark waiting to grow into something more. He thought of Laura's tired but grateful smile, of Tommy's laughter, and of the way helping them made him feel like his father was still walking beside him. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about the beginning of a bond that would change all of their lives forever. The weeks that followed the rainy night carried an unexpected warmth into Jake's life. He hadn't planned on seeing Laura and Tommy again, yet somehow fate had its own way of weaving paths together. Whether it was at the grocery store, where Laura worked the morning shift, or at the park where Tommy loved to run, Jake kept finding himself in their orbit. At first, he thought it was coincidence, but as days passed, he realized he looked forward to those little encounters more than anything else in his quiet routine. One morning, he spotted Laura's car in the parking lot outside the diner where he worked. Concern flickered across his face as he wondered if she was having more car trouble. Instead, he found her at a corner table with Tommy, sipping coffee while her son devoured a stack of pancakes. The way her face lit up when she noticed Jake made something stir inside his chest. It wasn't just gratitude anymore, it was recognition, the kind reserved for someone who had quietly become a part of their lives. Their conversations grew longer, easier. Sometimes Jake would check her car to make sure everything was still running fine. Other times, he'd show up at the park on his days off, tossing a baseball back and forth with Tommy while Laura watched from a bench. Her laughter soft, but full of something she hadn't felt in years: peace. For Jake, these moments filled a space he hadn't known. Empty. He had lost his father too young, and his mother was often consumed with double shifts, leaving him to grow up mostly on his own. Being around Tommy gave him a sense of family he never had. Tommy, in turn, adored Jake. To the 6-year-old, Jake wasn't just a teenager from down the street. He was a hero, someone who could fix cars, catch baseballs, and listen to his endless stories about superheroes and school adventures. He clung to Jake with the eager affection of a boy longing for a father figure, someone who would stay, someone who wouldn't disappear. Laura noticed this bond growing stronger every day, and though part of her worried about Tommy's attachment, another part of her was deeply grateful. It was rare to find someone so genuine. One Saturday afternoon, Laura decided it was time to thank Jake in a way that went beyond casual words. She invited him over for dinner, not as a guest passing through, but as someone whose presence had quietly become cherished. Jake was hesitant at first, unused to being welcomed into homes that weren't his own, but Laura's smile disarmed him, and Tommy's pleading eyes sealed the deal. He found himself standing at their small doorstep later that evening, carrying a nervous energy that felt strangely like homecoming. The house was modest, with creaky floorboards and walls that carried the faint scent of laundry soap and warm meals. To Jake, it felt alive. Laura had prepared simple food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a salad, but to him it was a feast. He hadn't shared a meal at a family table in years. Sitting across from Laura and beside Tommy, who barely left his side, Jake felt something powerful yet unspoken take root. Laughter spilled easily between bites, with Tommy animatedly telling stories, and Laura watching them both with a softness in her eyes she couldn't hide. As dinner stretched into the evening, Jake helped clear the dishes without being asked, rolling up his sleeves as though he had always belonged there. Laura found herself watching him with quiet awe, noticing the way he treated Tommy with patience, how he moved with ease in her little kitchen, how he didn't treat this evening as charity or obligation, but as something meaningful. For so long, it had been her and Tommy against the world. Now, seeing Jake with them, she felt a lump in her throat. It was as though a missing piece of their puzzle had quietly slipped into place. After dinner, Tommy eagerly showed Jake his drawings: superheroes with capes, cars that could fly, and stick-figure families that made Jake's heart ache in ways he couldn't explain. "This one's us," Tommy announced proudly, pointing at a sketch of 3 smiling figures. Jake swallowed hard, unsure of what to say, but the innocence in Tommy's eyes told him he didn't need to say anything at all. For the first time in years, Jake felt like he was part of a story bigger than himself, one that carried love instead of loneliness. As the evening grew late, Jake stood by the door ready to leave. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and Tommy's faint voice calling from his bedroom, wishing Jake good night. Laura lingered by the doorframe, her hands twisting nervously. She didn't want the moment to end, but her heart wrestled with fear and hope. Finally, her voice broke through the silence, trembling but sincere. "Jake, you've done more for us than I can ever repay." Her eyes searched his, uncertain, but full of something that had been building for weeks. Jake's brow furrowed slightly, unsure of what she meant. He opened his mouth to reassure her, but Laura's next words caught him completely off guard. Do you want to be my son's father?" The room seemed to freeze. The words hung between them, heavy yet fragile, filled with years of longing and loneliness, wrapped into a single question. Jake blinked, stunned, his chest tightening as though the air had suddenly grown thin. He turned his eyes toward Tommy's room, where a faint glow of a nightlight spilled into the hallway. He saw Tommy's hopeful eyes peek out from behind the doorframe, wide and waiting, as if he already knew what his mother had just asked. The boy's tiny, Hands gripped the wood, his face a mixture of innocence and yearning. Jake's heart thudded heavily in his chest. He was only 18. He was just figuring out his place in the world, juggling part-time jobs, its dreams, and the lingering grief of losing his father. Yet in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the unspoken plea in Tommy's eyes and the trembling honesty in Laura's voice. Jake's silence stretched long, not out of hesitation to care, but from the sheer weight of the question. He had never been asked to step into such a role before, never been given the chance to belong so deeply to someone else's life. Laura's face reflected a mix of fear and vulnerability, as if she regretted speaking too soon. But she hadn't spoken from impulse, she had spoken from truth. In the weeks since that rainy night, Jake had shown her more kindness, patience, and steadiness than anyone else had in years. The rain that had started their story together seemed like a memory now, replaced by the warm glow of the kitchen light that bathed them in quiet stillness. Jake finally drew in a breath, his voice low, almost unsure. "Laura, He stopped himself, words fumbling in his throat. His eyes flicked once more to Tommy, who stood silently but with a hope that could melt even the hardest heart. Jake realized this wasn't just about repairing cars or playing catch. It was about stepping into a life where love was waiting for him if he had the courage to reach for it. Laura's lips trembled as she waited, her chest rising and falling quickly. She had bared her heart in a way she never thought she could, risking rejection, but desperate for honesty. Jake's hand lingered on the doorknob, his mind racing with the enormity of her request. Yet deep inside, beneath the uncertainty and the youth, he felt a warmth, a calling. For the first time, he wasn't walking home to loneliness. For the first time, someone wanted him, not for what he could fix, but for who he could be. The days after Laura's trembling question were heavy with silence, but not the kind that pushed people apart. Instead, it was a silence filled with thought, reflection, and the quiet stirring of something bigger than all of them. Jake carried her words with him everywhere, through his shifts at the diner, through the lonely walks home, and even in the restless hours of the night. He wasn't sure he was ready to step into such a role, but he couldn't deny the pull in his heart every time he thought of Laura's tired smile or Tommy's hopeful eyes. Jake wasn't rich, and he wasn't seasoned in life's lessons like older men. He was only 18, barely stepping into adulthood himself. But what he lacked in wealth and age, he carried in sincerity. He knew what it was like to grow up missing a father's steady presence, to feel the ache of a void that nothing seemed to fill. That knowledge pushed him forward. He didn't want Tommy to feel the same hollow absence he had known all his life. That thought alone gave him a courage that surprised him. One evening, after finishing his shift, Jake stopped by a small flower shop tucked into the corner of Main Street. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in, and the scent of fresh blooms washed over him. He stared at the rows of colorful flowers, his palms sweating. Finally, he picked a bouquet of simple daisies mixed with roses, something bright, warm, and unpretentious. He held it carefully as though it carried not just flowers, but a message he couldn't yet say out loud. With his other hand, he carried a small baseball glove he had saved up for Tommy. When he arrived at Laura's doorstep, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. His heart thudded in his chest as Laura opened the door, her expression softening in surprise. At the sight of him standing there, Tommy peeked out from behind her, eyes widening with excitement when he spotted the glove in Jake's hand. Without a word, Jake stepped inside, and the warmth of their little home wrapped around him again, reminding him why he kept coming back. He bent down to Tommy's level, holding the glove out with a shaky smile. "I may not know everything about being a dad," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "but I'd like to try if you'll let me." For a moment the world seemed to still, waiting for the little boy's response. Then Tommy launched himself forward, wrapping his tiny arms around Jake's neck. His voice was muffled against Jake's shoulder, but the words were clear enough to break Jake's heart wide open. "You're already my dad." Laura stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. She had imagined this moment, dreamed of it, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw truth of seeing it unfold before her. Jake, this young man who had stumbled into their lives by chance, was giving them something far greater than repaired cars or shared laughter. He was giving them himself. Her tears spilled freely as she whispered through trembling lips, "Welcome to the family." Her words carried no hesitation now, only a certainty that came from deep within her soul. That night they shared dinner again, but it felt different this time. The laughter around the table carried a new weight, the kind born from belonging. Tommy sat proudly beside Jake, introducing him to his stuffed animals, his drawings, and even his favorite bedtime story, as though wanting to make sure Jake was fully part of every corner of their lives. Laura, sitting across from them, felt a peace she hadn't known in years. For once, the future didn't terrify her. It felt possible, even hopeful. In the days that followed, Jake's presence became a rhythm in their household. He would walk Tommy to school before heading to the diner, then return in the evenings to share dinner or help with homework. On weekends, he and Tommy would head to the park with the baseball gloves, their laughter echoing through the field as Laura watched from a bench, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. Adum wasn't perfect, and he didn't try to be, but his steady efforts, his patience, and his unwavering kindness were more valuable than perfection could ever be. Word spread quietly through their small town. Some people raised their brows, whispering about the young man barely grown himself, stepping into a father's shoes. But Laura didn't care about gossip, and Jake didn't either. What mattered were the smiles that lit Tommy's face, the comfort Laura felt when she no longer had to shoulder the world alone, and the warmth Jake carried each time he walked into their home. In the quiet of their little world, they were building something stronger than judgment. Something built on love, trust, and second chances. For Jake, every moment felt like healing. He found himself thinking of his own late father often, wishing he could see this unexpected turn in his son's life. Yet, in a way, he felt his father's presence guiding him, as though the skills he had taught him fixing cars, facing hardships with grit, had led him to this very family. He realized he wasn't just filling a space in their lives, they were filling one in his too. For the first time since his father's passing, he didn't feel alone. He felt needed, wanted, and loved. Tommy thrived under Jake's presence. His teachers noticed he smiled more, participated more eagerly, and spoke about "my dad" with a pride that melted even the hardest hearts. Jake attended school plays, little league games, and even helped Tommy build a soapbox car for a neighborhood race. With each passing week, the bond between them deepened, weaving tighter threads of family that no one could undo. Laura often found herself standing quietly in doorways, watching them together with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the gift she never thought life would give her. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Laura turned to Jake with a soft smile. "You know," she said, her voice carrying both gratitude and awe, "you've changed everything for us, not just for Tommy, but for me too." Jake looked at her, surprised, but she continued, "I thought I had to be strong alone. I thought love was something that passed me by, but you—" Her voice faltered, then steadied. "You proved me wrong." Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, holding it gently, as if promising with that small gesture to never let go. As months passed, the three of them settled into a life that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Their days were filled with routines, school, work, dinners, games, but underneath the simplicity was a love that held them together. Jake was no longer just the boy who had fixed a car. He was the young man who had helped mend hearts, and Laura, who once feared her son would grow up alone in the shadow of absence, now watched him flourish in the presence of a father figure who had chosen them. It wasn't chance anymore. It was destiny written in the rain. In time, Jake stopped questioning whether he was enough. He realized love wasn't about age, wealth, or experience. It was about showing up, day after day, even when life was difficult. And so he did, with unwavering devotion, standing in their small living room one evening, watching Laura laugh while Tommy chased their dog in circles. Jake finally understood. He hadn't just found a family. He had found a home, a purpose, and a love that would carry all of them through the years ahead. The boy who once walked home alone in the rain was no longer alone at all.